Foundation Incorporated welcome you to our momentous event this morning, the 15th Metrobank Foundation Professorial Chair Lecture. Good morning. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. I am Remedies A. Salazar Fernando of the Court of Appeals, your official of the ceremonies. To formally start our program, may I invite everyone to please stand for the doxology, to be followed by the singing of the Philippine National Anthem and the Supreme Court hymn by the exceptionally talented Supreme Court Choir.
Bayang magiliw, kailasan silanganan, alam ng puso, sa dikit mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisigil. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bugaw, may nilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kisap ng watawat mo'y kagumpay na naglilingling. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng ating pag...
Justice of the Supreme Court who is here with us now. Justice Reyes, palakpakan natin. The Vice Chancellor of the Philippine Judicial Academy, retired justice like me, retired justice of the Supreme Court, my colleague and friend, Justice Romeo J. Callejo Sr. Andiyan siya. Palakpakan natin si Justice Romy. I see some similarly retired justices of the Supreme Court. With us this morning, Justice Jose Vitog, si Justice Joe, Justice Angelina Sandoval Gutierrez, Justice Helen. Sino pa? Meron pa ba tayong nakalimutan? We have also the presiding justice of the Court of Tax Appeals, with whom we were yesterday as we inaugurated and blessed the Court of Tax Appeals Mediation Room, Justice Roman Del Rosario, presiding justice Roman. We are honored to have you. There are so many dignitaries. So I learned from Spain one greeting that covers all. It says, Su Señoría. Ibig sabihin, Your Honors. So hindi ko na banggitin lahat. I'll just say, Su Señoría, Your Honors. Distinguished guests, friends, students of the law, maing buntag kaninyong tanan. Assalamualaikum. Warak batulahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. That is the greeting from Mindanao. I'm very happy to greet you good morning and welcome you to this 15th Metrobank lecture, sponsored by the Metrobank Foundation, together with the Philippine Supreme Court's Philippine Judicial Academy. Alam po ninyo, malalaman po ninyo kung sino ang taga-Philippine Judicial Academy. They are so well dressed, I could not recognize them. They look so beautiful this morning. Palakpakan natin ang Philippine Judicial Academy. I would like also to thank the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court and the Court of Tax Appeals, Sandigan Bayan, our justices from these courts, as well as the tax experts who have graced this occasion to join us, and the students on taxation. You know, the power to tax is the power to destroy, but it also is the power to give life, for taxes are the lifeblood of government. Lately, the trend in taxation is to use taxation as a tool for development. You know, the state can take away your properties in three ways. Our system is derived from the U.S. system, where private property is very sacrosanct. Alam ninyo, no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Very important sa system natin yung property. But there are three ways in which the state can take away your property. First is through police power. In order to save the public good, it can take away your property and destroy it. You have to destroy it. If the state takes away your property without destroying it, that is expropriation. It has to pay just compensation. That's the second way, the eminent domain. The third way is through taxation. Through taxation, the state can take away your property without necessarily having to repay you for it directly. It comes back in some other way. So we are talking this morning of the third way in which the state can take away your property. But as I said, it has been used now as a tool for development. The latest Nobel Prize winner on economics, William Nordhaus, developed the concept of using taxation as a tool to control pollution, the so-called pollution tax. And it will save our planet from developing the 2 degrees warming that is so feared. We can no longer prevent the 1.5 degree warming. What we can still prevent, perhaps through taxation, is the 2 degrees warming. We cannot know what will happen to the world if there is a 3 degrees, 4 degrees, 5 degrees warming. Why? Because it never happened before. We don't know what kind of world we'll have if we have 3, 4, 5 degrees warming. What we can stop is 2 degrees warming. Right now we have 1.5, and we have so powerful typhoons that it's incredible to see them in their full fury. So, can taxation perhaps be the tool to prevent this? Because taxation controls the way we behave. It is a tool for restructuring human behavior. According to John Maynard Keynes, foremost economist, his definition of a good lawyer, he was asked, economist ito ha, you know, an economist is defined as person who can tell you tomorrow why what he said yesterday did not happen today. That's an economist. And they asked the foremost economist, John Maynard Keynes, ano ang ibig sabihin ng good lawyer for you? He said, for me, a good lawyer is not someone who will tell me what to do. He is someone who can tell me how to do what I want to do in a way that I do not break the law. That is his definition of a good lawyer. In other words, the difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance. You cannot do tax evasion, but you can do tax avoidance. What is tax avoidance? That is legal. It is so arranging your activity and life so as to minimize the impact of taxes. That's tax avoidance. That's allowed. So that is what our talk will be about today. The title is Tax Principles and Remedies as Tools for Inclusive Economic Growth, Development, Prosperity, and Stability. I ask our speaker to limit himself to 3 hours. Joke only. He said it will be under 1 hour. So I welcome you again. Our proceedings is being live streamed and also live linked with our students downstairs. So welcome again and maraming salamat sa inyo lahat.
To introduce our distinguished lecturer is one of the most respected justices, a former colleague in the Court of Appeals who was recently appointed to the Supreme Court. He is the epitome of judicial decorum and ethics. That's why he is our bishop in the Court of Appeals and now a cardinal of the Supreme Court, as he exudes the profile of the ideal judge: kind, soft-hearted, patient, dignified, honest, and devout. May I call on Mr. Justice Jose C. Reyes, Jr.
Marami hong salamat, Tita Mids. It was just like a eulogy, no? Thank you. Thank you very much to our most senior Associate Justice of the Court of Appeals, Justice Remedios Salazar Fernando, soon to join us in the Supreme Court. Perhaps I may be excused from reciting again the litany of our dignitaries and taking the cue from Justice Ascuna. May I simply say, Your Honors, good morning. And their ladies, like Tita Gigi. This morning, I have the difficult job of introducing of our lecturer, but I could not refuse my best friend in the Court of Appeals. So here I am to say a few words, probably about 3 pages, to introduce our lecturer. May I begin by saying that Our speaker today is a person who holds an untarnished reputation, a man of high moral and ethical principles, whose competence, integrity, probity, and independence are beyond question. He is an incumbent Associate Justice of the Court of Appeals, who was appointed by then President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo on April 2, 2004. Presently, he is the chairman of the 5th Division and the only Muslim Associate Justice of the Court of Appeals. He hails from Marawi City, Lanao del Sur. A CPA lawyer by profession, our speaker graduated college from the University of the East Manila with a Bachelor of Science degree, major in Business Administration and Accounting. After passing the licensure examinations for certified public accountants in 1983, at a very young age, he was just 19 years old, he decided to pursue law in the same university as a university scholar. On his first take, he successfully hurdled the bar examinations in 1988. Rising from the ranks, he initially worked in the Court of Appeals as a court attorney from 1996 to the year 2000. After that, he became a senior state prosecutor of the Department of Justice. His work as a prosecutor was short-lived, as he was called to serve the judiciary. Once again, after he was appointed as presiding judge and later on as executive judge of the Regional Trial Court of Mandaluyong in the year 2000. Close to about 4 years thereafter, he rose to become the youngest Associate Justice of the Court of Appeals at the age of 40. Concurrently, he holds other positions in the bench, to wit, chairperson of the Philippine Judicial Academy, Department of Sharia and Islamic Jurisprudence, vice chairperson of the Supreme Court Subcommittee on Special Commercial Courts, Professor 2, Philippine Judicial Academy, and lecturer in taxation and commercial law for the MCLE, or the Mandatory Continuing Legal Education. Despite his busy schedule in the judiciary, our speaker, who is an academician by heart, was not hindered from pursuing his unwavering passion for teaching. In fact, he has been in the academe molding students for 27 years and counting. He is currently handling civil law, taxation law, and commercial law classes in the Graduate School of Law of San Beda College, or rather University, the San Beda College of Law, University of Santo Tomas, Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila, and University of the East, among others. His fields of expertise are taxation, referring to general principles of taxation, income taxation, transfer taxes, local taxation, tariff and customs, and tax remedies, and commercial law, particularly negotiable instruments law, private corporation law, insurance, law on transportation, and special commercial laws. And I would also want to add, with all due respect to my professor, Justice Vito, that our speaker could be your heir apparent, because he's the only professor now of law who can teach civil law, commercial law, and taxation at the same time, just like you, sir. Palakpakan naman natin. The only professor, si Justice Bito, could, whenever he discusses certain issues, he would always talk about the issue from the aspect of civil, commercial, and taxation. Kulang na lang ho, criminal law. Yeah. To his credit, Justice, our lecturer, has published 4 books. 3 in taxation and 1 in commercial law. The first 2, entitled Basic Approach to Income Taxation and Tax Principles and Remedies, are also being used as international references in the legal library of the prestigious Harvard Law School in Massachusetts, United States. The third book, entitled The Essentials of Local Government and Real Property Taxation, is an endeavor to obtain a clearer and keener understanding of the jurisprudential approach towards local government taxation. The fourth book is a pre-week reviewer in commercial law, and this is a useful guide to bar examinees as they hurdle the grueling final weeks of their review. His opus on methods of trial and justice, inquisitorial and adversarial systems in Islamic, civil, and common law was published by the Islamic Science University of Malaysia. To top it off, he was the bar examiner in civil law in 2013 and 2016 bar examinations, making him one of the most sought-after bar reviewers. Likewise, he is a consultant of the Committee on Bar Examinations in Commercial Law and Taxation Law of University of the Philippines Law Center. Throughout his career, he received several awards, recognitions, and citations, most notable of which are the Hall of Fame Award, Huarang Filipino Award, Award of Excellence, and the Most Outstanding Alumnus of the University of the East. On a really personal note, he is the only Muslim justice who blesses me every day or every time we talk. He would often say, "God bless you, my best friend." Sino sa inyong nagigreet ng ganyan, ha? Coming from a Muslim at that, telling you that God will bless you. That's our lecturer. And I really appreciate that. Last and most importantly, he is happily married to his one and only wife. May I call on Maria Gina Perez Villapan. Gina, tayo ka naman dyan. She is the woman behind the success of this man. So, please join me now in welcoming Court of Appeals Associate Justice Japar B. Dimaampao.
Thank you for the kind words, my best friend, Justice Joe Reyes. A pleasant good morning to one and all. First off, I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the Metrobank Foundation through its President, Aniceto Sobrepeña, for this distinct ennoblement. 2018 Metrobank Foundation Professorial Chairholder in Taxation Law. Likewise, I would like to acknowledge with deep appreciation the presence of Fascia Chancellor Justice Adolfo Escuna, Fascia Vice Chancellor Justice Romy Caleo Sr., members of the Academic Council of the Philippine Judicial Academy, retired Justice of the Supreme Court, my tita, Justice Helen Gutierrez, my esteemed reactors, retired Justice of the Supreme Court, my idol, Justice Jose Vitog, and my friend, Attorney Abelardo Dumondon, Presiding Justice of the Court of Tax Appeals, Roman Del Rosario, and Associate Justices of the Court of Tax Appeals, deans from the various law schools and members of the academy, justices of my colleagues in the Court of Tax Appeals, including those retired justices, judges and prosecutors, members of the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, family, friends, guests, and the last but not the least, my one and only wife, Gina. We start off, Justice Colley, in his treatise on constitutional limitations, described the wide spectrum of taxation in this wise. The power to tax is one so unlimited in force and so certain in extent that the courts scarcely venture to declare that it is subject to any restrictions whatever, except such as raised in the discretion of the authority that exercises it. The power of taxation is so comprehensive in that it reaches to every trade or occupation, to every object of industry, use, or enjoyment, to every species of possession, and it imposes a burden which, in case of failure to discharge the same, may be followed by seizure and sale or confiscation of property. No attribute of sovereignty is more pervading, and at no point does the power of the government affect more constantly and intimately all relations of life than the exactions made under it. It is true that the subject of taxation is admittedly difficult. However, it is equally true that the indispensability of taxation for the existence of the government strikes a chord within the hearts and minds of the taxpayers. The evolution of taxation is quite riveting. The history of taxes stretches thousands of years into the past. Several ancient civilizations, including the Greeks and Romans, levied taxes on their citizens to to pay for military expenses and public projects. Taxation evolved significantly as empires expanded and colonizations became more structured. The earliest known tax records, dating approximately 6,000 years before Christ, are in the form of clay tablets found in the ancient city of Lagash in the modern-day Iraq. This early form of taxation was kept to a minimum, except during periods of conflicts or hardship. During the medieval period, fair taxation was the key issue for many English citizens, as they were required to pay property taxes on the lands they rented and were obligated to pay 10% donation of their labor to the church. The colonial period saw the evolution of tax policies as wealth began to flow into Europe from Africa, Asia, and America. The main grievance with this tax policy was distilled in a single phrase: no taxation without representation. The recent tax history has its precursor in the first U.S. federal income tax. The taxation was not universal, as it only applied to citizens above certain level of income. This federal income tax was repealed in 1870 to pave the way for the creation of a new tax legislation in 1894. As it happened, many European nations eventually adopted their systems of taxation. Every so often, these tax systems are modified to attune to the changing time. These are now known as the modern tax regime. Let me now start with the first part of the lecture, tax principles. Basic tax principles are as nearly as old as human society. Tax principles are basic concepts by which a government is meant to be guided in designing and implementing a tax system. Adam Smith, the 18th century economist and philosopher, and now known as the father of the modern political economy, in his book entitled The Wealth of Nations, described this as the canons of taxation, which consist of rules and principles upon which a good system of taxation should be built. These are considered as the foundation of discussion on principles of taxation. In this light, Adam Smith conceived these four famous canons of taxation, namely canon of equality or ability, canon of clarity or certainty, canon of convenience, and canon of economy. Adam Smith expressed the canon of equality or ability in this rhetoric. The subjects of every state ought to contribute towards the support of the government as nearly as possible in proportion to their respective abilities. That is, in proportion to the revenue they respectively enjoy under the protection of the state. This means that people should be taxed in proportion to their ability to pay. This is in consonance with the principle of progressive system of taxation, under which tax rate increases as the tax base increases. In other words, rich people should pay more taxes and the poor pay less. This, in effect, brings about social inequality or justice, also in the equitable distribution of wealth. Adam Smith articulated the canon of clarity of certainty in this wise. The tax each individual is bound to pay ought to be certain and not arbitrary. The time of payment, the manner of payment, the quantity to be paid ought all to be clear and plain to every contributor and other person. This means that a tax system should apprise the taxpayers adequate knowledge of the payment of tax, the amount to be paid, the amount it should be paid, and the date of payment. This will inevitably minimize tax evasion. Adam Smith textualized this canon of convenience in this language. Every tax ought to be levied at the time or in the manner in which it is most likely to be convenient for the contributor to pay. This is an amplification of the canon of clarity or certainty in that convenient system of taxation will encourage people to pay taxes and eventually increase the revenues for the government. Adam Smith verbalized this canon of economy in this prose. Every tax ought to be so contrived as both to take out and to keep out the pockets of the people as little as possible over and above what it brings on to the public treasury of the state. This means that this underscores the primary purpose of taxation, which is to raise revenue for public welfare projects. In a sense, a large collection of taxes should be brought to the Treasury, which may be earmarked for various government infrastructure. To attune to these changing times, modern economies develop 5 more canons of taxation, namely, canon of productivity, canon of elasticity, canon of flexibility, canon of simplicity, and canon of diversity. According to the U.S. Supreme Court jurisprudence of tax fairness, there are 2 recognized tax principles, and these are known as the horizontal equity and the vertical equity. The horizontal equity yields this maxim: a similarly situated taxpayer should be taxed the same. On the other hand, vertical equity enunciates this rule that differently situated taxpayers should be taxed differently. In a sense, in horizontal equity, fairness demands a similar treatment of taxpayers at the same levels. Conversely, in vertical equity, fairness requires the different tax treatment of taxpayers at different levels of income. The Philippine tax system, based on Section 2 of Republic Act 8424, otherwise known as the 1997 Comprehensive Tax Reform Act, and Republic Act 10963, otherwise known as the Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion. These 2 tax laws have adopted these 3 fundamental principles of taxation, and you are all familiar with these, law students and bar reviewers. As regards these principle of fiscal adequacy, in the case of Ongpen versus Chavez, 186 Isra 331, the Supreme Court said fiscal adequacy means the sources of revenue must be adequate to meet government expenditures and their variations. Theoretical justice or equality requires that the taxes levied must be just and it must take into consideration the citizens' ability to pay. Theoretical administrative feasibility principle according to the 1939 Tax Commission. The tax must be plain and clear to the taxpayers, capable of enforcement by well-trained and adequate staff of public officials, convenient as to the time and manner of payment, and not duly burdensome upon or discouraging to business activity. Discernibly, the principle of administrative feasibility encompasses the exacting requirements of the canons of certainty, convenience, and simplicity. Likewise, the canons of productivity and economy run along parallel lines with the principle of fiscal adequacy. It cannot be gainsaid that adherence to the canons of elasticity, flexibility, and diversity will create robust environment for business, as it will enable firms to compete not only in the global but also in the regional market. Having said this, at this course on the trend law, strikes the right chord with the protestations against amendments to the NIRC. A reading of this Republic Act 10963, otherwise known as the Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion, reveals that it has complied with these three fundamental principles of a sound tax system. Briefly, these are the new rules under the trend law that are consistent with the principle of fiscal adequacy. The rates have been increased as regards individual taxpayers from 5 to 32%. The rates now are 20 to 35%. The 7.5% final tax, these are favorite bar questions, on the interest income from bank deposit maintained under the expanded foreign currency deposit system, it has been increased to 15%. The tax on net capital gain derived from the sale of a source of stock, which are not listed and traded through local stock exchange, is now 15% final tax. So it increases the rate. If the shares of stock are listed and traded subject to percentage tax of 6/10 or 0.6 of 1% of the gross selling price. The 32% tax on fringe benefits has been increased now to 35%. Rules under the trend law that are in accord with the principle of administrative feasibility, notable of which is the 8% tax that may be availed of by individual taxpayers that derive trade, business, or from the exercise of profession. You have option to avail of the progressive rates of 20 to 35% or this 8% of the gross sales or receipts, provided that your gross sales or receipts do not exceed the threshold amount of 3 million. And this is a rule which has been in existence and now it is incorporated in the trade law. You must know by now that you need not file your income tax return if you are qualified under the so-called substituted filing of income tax return. Make sure that your only source of income, compensation income, one employer in the Philippines, and the tax due and tax withheld must be the same. Your employer must report to the BIR regarding the tax withheld on that compensation income. It is now clear, unlike before, that a general professional partnership and professional partners can now avail of the optional standard deduction of 40%. As regards estate tax, it is now a new rule that the filing of the estate tax return is 1 year from the death of the decedent. You, as executor, may withdraw such deposit in a bank that is only subject to 6% final tax. There is this 2-year period within which to pay estate tax, no penalty and interest may be imposed. Now, regarding donor's tax, law students, bar examinees, you take note of this. What you learn under Section 100 has been the subject of amendment, and that is, it is no longer subject to donor's tax. This sale of ordinary asset, exchange of ordinary assets at a price below the fair market value, provided that it is made in good faith or at arm's length transaction. Now, regarding rules that are in congruence with the principle of theoretical justice, notable of which is the exemption of that taxable income in the amount of 250,000. The lump sum limitation has been increased from 82,000 to 90,000. This may include Christmas bonus, 13th month pay, and other benefits. Estate tax, allowable deductions. The 2 million standard deduction has been increased to 5 million. Non-resident decedent is now allowed to claim 500,000 of standard deduction. The family home of 5 million has been increased to 10 million. The rate has been reduced from 5 to 20% to only 6% of the net estate. Regarding donor's tax, 250,000 is exempt. And in excess of that, it is only subject to a reduced rate of 6%. So indeed, the trend law has complied with these 3 fundamental principles of a sound tax system. Due to time constraint, I'll just focus on significant tax principles. You all know, as law students, bar examinees are aware, that the most popular tax principle, as it has been cited by the Supreme Court in several decisions, is the lifeblood doctrine. You should know by now that this lifeblood doctrine, which says taxes are the lifeblood of the government and their prompt and certain availabilities and imperious need, enunciated in that 1935 case of Bull versus United States 295 U.S. 247, has its precursor as far back as 106 years before Christ. That dictum was first pronounced by Roman statesman and orator Marcus Tullius Cicero when he said that taxes are the sinews of the state, victicalia, nervis, and publica. Let me just point out 3 decisions of the Supreme Court citing this lifeblood doctrine in establishing certain tax jurisprudence. 1, in the case of Camp Janhay Development Corporation versus CBEA 706, Scrap 547, the Supreme Court said, tax collection cannot be curtailed by injunction or any like action. Number 2, in the case of Commissioner versus BPI 521 Scrap 373, the Supreme Court emphasized the theory behind the power to tax, and the court said it emanates from necessity. Without taxes, the government cannot fulfill its mandate of promoting the general welfare and well-being of the people. Number 3, in the recent case of Commissioner versus Nippon Express Company 771 Scrap 27, the Supreme Court held that in matters of taxation, the government cannot be stopped by the mistakes, errors, or omission of its agents. For upon it depends the ability of the state to serve the people for whose taxes are collected. This 1803 dictum, the power to tax is the power to destroy, that has been popularized by Chief Justice John Marshall of the U.S. Supreme Court. It was echoed in the landmark case of McCulloch versus Maryland in 1819. However, in 1938, in the case of Greaves versus New York, 306 U.S. 466, Justice Frankfurter described such dictum as a flourish of rhetoric attributable to the intellectual fashion of the times, allowing free use of absolute. Justice Frankfurter emphasized there cannot be such constitutional mandate. He was in unison with Justice Holmes. The power to tax is not the power to destroy while this court sits. We have given judicial imprimatur to such pronouncement in the landmark case of Season Jr. versus Ansita 130/654. Invariably, in 1968, in the case of Rojas versus CTA 23/282, the Philippine Supreme Court through Justice Bingzon made this pronouncement. The power of taxation is sometimes called the power to destroy. Therefore, it should be exercised with caution to minimize injury to the proprietary rights of a taxpayer. It must be exercised fairly, equally, and uniformly, lest the collector kill the hen that lays the golden egg. One of the inherent limitations on the exercise of the power of taxation is that taxes must be levied for public purpose. In the recent case of Ferrer Jr. versus Bautista, 7620/652, the Supreme Court laid down this rule that the public purpose of the tax may legally exist even if it favors one class over another. The Supreme Court in this case sustained the differential tax treatment that is accorded to the implementation of the comprehensive urban development project, housing project of the government. In line with this, the U.S. Supreme Court, in that famous case of Carmichael versus Southern Coal and Coal Company, 301 U.S. 459, and law students are aware of this. This has been cited by the Supreme Court in several decisions, and this is what the U.S. Supreme Court said: inequalities which may result from the singling out of a particular class for taxation or exemption infringe no constitutional limitation. There is this new jurisprudence. As a rule, taxes are not subject of set-off. That is disfavored by the lifeline doctrine. However, in that case of Commissioner versus Toledo, 775/709, it summarized these rulings of the court in three cases. One, Commissioner versus CTA, City Trust 234/348. Number two, South African Airways versus Commissioner 612/665. 3, Philippine Technology versus Commissioner 739/691. In all these three cases, the Supreme Court said, and this is a common denominator of these three, offsetting of taxes is allowed. And that is when the determination of the taxpayer's tax liability is intertwined with the resolution of that claim for refund. The Supreme Court did not, unfortunately, say the reason But to my mind, the reason there is to avoid multiplicity of suits. Tax evasion. There is this landmark case on tax evasion, which was asked twice already in the bar exam. So indeed, this is the mother of all tax evasion cases. I'm referring to the case of the state of Benigno Tuda versus Commissioner 438 Iskra 290. Here, the Philippine Supreme Court reversed the decision of the Court of Tax Appeals, holding that the tax planning scheme of the state of Benigno Tuda is indeed tax evasion. This was penned by no less than our retired Chief Justice Hilary G. Davide Jr. I'm so sorry I felt well. And my beloved Auntie Mrs. Gigi Davide. Here, he reversed the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court reversed the decision of the CTA, holding that that tax planning scheme is a tax evasion, pointing out the three requisites for tax evasion, namely, based on the American jurisprudence, one, the end to be achieved, which is either not to pay the tax or to pay lesser tax liability. The state of mind must be evil, bad faith, or deliberate, and the course of action must be illegal or unlawful. Because of that decision of the Supreme Court, the government was able to save 79,099,992.22. That demonstrates judicious application of the requisites of tax evasion. This principle of strictissime juris is a popular tax principle which says that tax exemption must be strictly construed against the taxpayer and liberal in favor of the government. We must know by now that the genesis of this is in volume 2 of the Book of Justice Colley, pages 1403 to 1414, wherein he laid down the rule that taxation is the rule and exemption the exception. In an American case decided by the Philippine case decided by the Supreme Court, and I refer to the case of Masida versus Macaray, the Philippine Supreme Court recognizes an exception to this, and that is when the grantee is an agency of the government. Justice Colley also recognized an exception to the rule, and that is if the grantee is a municipal corporation. We must know the rationale behind the grant of exemption to charitable institutions. Professor Hansman of the University of Yale, in his thesis entitled "The Rationale for Exemption from Taxation of Non-Government Organizations," explained that as a matter of efficiency, the government forgoes taxes which would have been used to address public needs because certain public-private entities assume a part of the burden. He explicated that the government, the loss of taxes brought about by such an exemption is compensated by its relief from doing public work, which would have been funded by appropriations from Congress. This growing issue brings to light, this growing issue on inflation rate brings to light the stare power of the President, provided for in Article 6, Section 28, Paragraph 2. It says that the Congress may by law authorize the President to fix within specified limits and subject to the limitations and restrictions as it may impose tariff rates, import and export quotas, tonnage and wharfage dues, and other duties or imposed within the framework of the National Development Program of the government. If we read Section 1608 of Republic Act 10863, otherwise known as the Customs Modernization and Tariff Act, it is clear therein that this constitutional criterion is missing. It merely says, in the interest of general welfare and national security. National economy is no longer there. The President, upon recommendation of the National Economic and Development Authority, may increase, reduce, remove protective tariff rates on duty. So the President may exercise this. So the limitation is that it must not exceed 100% of the ad valorem. The President may likewise impose additional duties on all imports, provided that it must not exceed 10% of the existing ad valorem. So, is that constitutionally infirm? I leave that to you. This may be exercised according to Section 1608, paragraph E, when Congress is not in session. The President may take advantage of this power, and it has constitutional basis in Article 6, Section 28, paragraph 2 of the Constitution. Local government units have this constitutional power to raise their own sources of revenue under Article 10, Section 5 of the Constitution, which says that each local government unit shall have the power to create its own sources of revenue and to levy taxes, fees, and charges subject to the guidelines and limitations as the Congress may provide, consistent with the basic policy of local autonomy. Such taxes, fees, and charges shall exclusively accrue to the local governments. In two cases, one was penned by former Chief Justice Hilario G. Davide Jr. I'm referring to the landmark case of Mactan Cebu International Airport Authority versus Marcos 261 extra 667. The Supreme Court emphasized the importance of this taxing power of the local government units, reiterated in the recent case of National Power Corporation versus CBEA 577 extra 418, wherein the Supreme Court consistently emphasized the power of taxation is the most effective instrument to raise the needed revenues to finance and support the myriad activities of local government units for the delivery of basic services essential to the promotion of the general welfare of the people, welfare and the enhancement of peace, progress, and prosperity of the people. If you find difficulty in understanding income tax, you are not alone. No less than genius Albert Einstein, through his accountant, Leo Matterstorp, commented, admitted, open quote, the hardest thing in the world to understand is the income tax, close quote. With this, let me just briefly discuss these income tax systems adopted under the Trill Law. We have adopted net income taxation and gross income taxation. We have yet to adopt the so-called modified gross income taxation. When you speak of net income taxation, it allows deduction. As the tax base is taxable income, tax authorities are of the view that net income taxation is an equitable system of taxation. It minimizes fraud or tax evasion because of the tax audit that is that may be made in determining whether the deductions claimed by the taxpayers are legitimate or not. Gross income taxation allows no deduction. Precisely, the tax base is gross income. It has been said that it simplifies our income taxation. It minimizes graft and corruption because the perceived source of corruption here, deductions, are eliminated. Now, modified gross income taxation, very simple. Limit the deduction, reduce the rates. The effect is that investors will come in, and this also simplifies our tax system. I just would like to point out, and I hope our Congress will consider this, that under Section 57, which has adopted this final withholding tax system, there are only 28 items of income that are subject to final tax. And as emphasized by the Supreme Court in the case of Commissioner versus City Trust 280 Iscra 459, in withholding tax system, the purpose there is to improve the government's cash flow. So these are sure revenues to the government. Why does Congress increase the number of items of income that are subject to final tax that may even meet the target collection? Tax remedies, please bear with me. I'll just summarize the important rules on tax remedies. Tax remedies, let me start with the pronouncement of the Supreme Court in the case of Rojas versus Rafferty, 37 Philippine Reports, 957. The Supreme Court emphasized that the government and the taxpayer should stand on reasonably equal terms. The power of the state and the remedies of the taxpayer are and should be reciprocal. My other Justice Joseph Vitog, in his book, and that's the only book where you can find this discussion on the fundamental principles of tax remedies, and synthesis, when the tax law is silent on administrative and judicial remedies, the government may avail of the same, but as regards administrative remedies, that may be only resorted to for convenience or expediency. On the part of the taxpayers, taxpayers can avail of that, even if the tax statute is silent, that administrative remedies, but only for purposes of convenience or practicability. If the tax statute is silent, you apply the settled rules of procedure, general law application, and they may particular to the nature of declaratory relief under section Rule 63 of the Rules of Court or tax refund. On the other hand, if the tax law is explicit on judicial and administrative remedies, the government must comply with the legal parameters set forth therein. As regards taxpayers, if it is in the nature of administrative remedy, the law is explicit on the same, you really have to comply with that principle of exhaustion of administrative remedies, and you are all aware of the exceptions, judicial question, lack of jurisdiction, illegal act or violation of due process. And if it is explicit on judicial remedies, the rule says it must be exclusive. There are two aspects of tax administration: collection and assessment. It is clear under sections 203 and 222 of the NRC that prior assessment is not a condition sine qua non precedent to collection of taxes. That is provided for in section 203 and 222 of the tax code. According to the landmark case of Commissioner versus Huntex Trading, penned by Justice Romy Calejo, 454-301, the Supreme Court has given judicial imprimatur to the application of the best evidence obtainable rule, and this finds support in Section 6B of the NIRC, which provides for instances where the BIR may make an assessment based on that based evidence obtainable rule. One, if the taxpayer filed no report, if the taxpayer filed a false report, if the taxpayer filed an erroneous report, or illegal, incomplete report. Interestingly, you must be aware that there is this power of the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue under Section 204 to compromise tax liabilities, to simplify this discussion. Other than the two grounds of financial incapacity, doubtful validity, you just take note of those cases which cannot be compromised. Expressionius is exclusion ulterius, withholding tax cases, criminal fraud cases, criminal cases filed in court, approved schedule of payment in installment, final reports on investigation or reconsideration, and let me briefly discuss the last two. This has been the subject of 3 BIR Revenue Regulations 7-2001, 30-2002, 8-2004. I am referring to these last two cases which cannot be compromised. First, and number 6, final judgment. You must understand that it is qualified by this phrase if the request is based on doubtful validity. By inference, it can still be compromised if the ground is financial incapacity. Regarding state taxes, this cannot be compromised, and this condition is clear in that if the request is based on financial incapacity, it has been defined that it can still be compromised if the ground is doubtful validity. The most important and popular tax remedy, rule on tax remedy, is the no injunction rule, which you will find in Section 218 of the NIRC amended by Republic Act 10963. No court shall have the authority to grant an injunction to restrain the collection of taxes, fees, or charges. You should know by now that this rule has its progenitor in an 1877 case of the state of Tennessee versus Ned, and in that case, this is how it explained the rationale. It is a wise and reasonable precaution for the protection of the government. No government can continue to exist if it allowed its collection to be delayed by litigious men to whom delay was more important than the payment of taxes. In Philippines sitting, it is clear under Republic Act 9282, Section 7, Paragraph 4, that the CTA has the power to restrain the collection of taxes as regards those cases pending before it. And the ground, it must be shown that the collection will jeopardize the interest of the taxpayer or the government. And number 2 condition, bond must be posted, either cash or surety bond. If it were a surety bond, it must not be double the amount or the value of the property levied or distrained, as the case may be. Taxpayers' remedies, when you receive an assessment from the BIR, these are your remedies. You may either protest that or pay the tax and thereafter file a written claim for refund. Now, recently, the BIR has restored the so-called informal notice of conference. You must understand, as we are all taxpayers, that the one that must be protested, and this is a new term under Revenue Regulations 18-2013, 3.1.3, final letter of demand / final assessment notice. You check what you receive from the BIR, that must be the title of that. It's not the preliminary assessment notice. It's not the notice of informal conference recently restored by the BIR by virtue of Revenue Regulation 7-2018, effective January 22, 2018. Your remedy is either to file a request for investigation or reconsideration. You file a request for reconsideration if it is based on existing record. You file, on the other hand, a request for investigation if there is such newly discovered evidence. And you may appeal the decision of the BIR to the CTA in Banc. If there is a decision rendered 30 days from receipt thereof, there are two rulings of the court. I refer to the case of RCBC versus Commissioner 522 scrap page 522 scrap 144, and the recent case of Lascuna Land versus Commissioner 667 scrap 445, wherein the Supreme Court held taxpayer has two mutually alternative remedies. It's either to appeal such inaction to the city in division within 30 days from the lapse of the 180-day period, or await such decision of the BIR and within 30 days from receipt thereof, appeal the same to the CTA. This remedy in tax refund in a long line of cases, the Supreme Court said that this refund under Section 229 may prosper upon the concurrence of the following conditions. One, it must be in writing. Number two, it must contain a categorical demand for reimbursement. And three, it must be filed within that 2-year period from the date of payment, regardless of the happening of supervening cause or event. Now let me end this lecture on tax remedies with this controversial section introduced by the trend law. I'm referring to Section 112. With all due respect, the rules before are clear. Now, let me say this. As amended by the trend law, Section 112 introduced these new rules. One, it is only limited to tax refund, though the title mentioned about tax credit, so that's ambiguous again. Number two, the period for the commissioner to render such decision has been reduced from 120-day to 90-day period. Three, and this is the one which is ambiguous. In case of failure on the part of the BIR agent or employee to act on that application, no remedy is clearly provided therein. Unlike in the old provision, within 30 days from the lapse of that 120-day period, it merely provides that the BIR official or employee should be penalized for failure to act on such an application. It accordingly amended Section 269 as item J, which imposes, in addition to that penalty of fine and imprisonment, that dismissal from service. In conclusion, it is imperative to reconcile the discernible interests of the taxing authorities and the taxpayers, so that the genuine and real purpose of taxation, which is the promotion of the general welfare and well-being of the people, may be achieved. In this accord, guiding norms in establishing and enforcing a tax system must be mastered as reasonable and equitable rules. In December, tax remedies should ensure the collection of taxes and provide safeguards against unreasonable and arbitrary investigation, examination, or assessment. Suffice it to say that the flawed and a valid claim for demand of taxes dispenses with protest, resulting in the speedy collection of taxes. This, in effect, gives flicker of hope to the realization of the government's pregnant wish. flow of revenue, like springs of living water and rivers that never run dry. And these revenues brought to public coffers must be appropriately marked for public purpose. In general, this must be used to carry out the legitimate objectives of the government. In particular, this must be utilized to build hospitals, school buildings, bridges, various infrastructure of the government, and pay government employees and officials. Indeed, the adoption of a sound tax system and clear-cut rules on evidence will propel inclusive and sustainable economic growth, development, prosperity, and stability. In this, taxation is used as an instrument to attain economic progress and stable governance. With this empirical pronouncement, let us disabuse our minds from the notion that taxation is an arbitrary method of exaction by those in the seat of power. To end this, let me quote a 1963 decision of the Tax Court of the United States in the case of Harbin versus Commissioner 40 TC 373, open quote, taxation is not only practical, it is vital. The obligation of good faith and fair dealing in carrying out its provision is reciprocal, and as the government should never overreaching or tyrannical, neither should the taxpayer be permitted to escape payment by the concealment of material facts. Close quote. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough for your presence. May God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice Dimaampao, for that very informative and scholarly presentation, complete with passion. This morning, may I acknowledge the presence of the President of Metrobank Foundation Incorporated, Mr. Aniceto Sobrepeña. This morning, we will be joined by two respected academics to give their reactions to the paper of Justice Dimaampao. Each of our reactors has 15 minutes to give his reaction. After their reactions, we shall have an open forum. Our first reactor is Justice Jose C. Vitug. He was an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court from 1993 to 2004. In the highest court of the land, he was on various dates a working chairperson of the First Division, chairperson of the Third Division, chairperson of the House of Representatives Electoral Tribunal, senior member of the Senate Electoral Tribunal, chairperson of the Committee on Legal Education and Bar Matters, chairperson of the Bar Examinations, co-chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations, and consultant of the Judicial and Bar Council. Justice Vitug is a senior professor at the Philippine Judicial Academy. He is a consultant of the Supreme Court Committee on Revision of Rules of Court and Committee on Ethics and Ethical Standards. He is also a consultant of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. He also chairs and sits in the board of various corporations and remains to be active in the academe. He is the founding dean of the AUF, or Angeles University Foundation College of Law. He has been a law professor, a reviewer in civil law, commercial law, and taxation, and also an author of various books. Ladies and gentlemen, Justice Jose C. Vito.
Salamat po. Thank you very much. Your Honors all, how can I react to a very well presented paper by my colleague, Justice Londo, and Justice Dimaampao? It was an excellent paper, if I may say so. It's rather a complex one. If you would want me to make it a little bit more complex, you'll let me know, please, because, my goodness, the subject is not, and the reason why I put up a book on it is because I found it so difficult to understand. And when that great scientist said that, income taxation is one of the most complicated matters he has encountered, it was not only an understatement. He was talking about the basic part of taxation. And the rest of taxation he should have taken a look at. So, my friends, I would like to, if I may, not deal on something which has been extensively dealt with and then still make it more complicated than it already is. Instead, I'd like to continue with some basics that were started by my good friend Chancellor Adolf. So started to talk about the principles of taxation. These are the simple ones. And this is what I would like to do, if I may. Exactly, this is what my brief paper is. I have only 15 minutes. I've consumed already 3 minutes of that. Yes, but it's okay. One of the things, basic tenets that were mentioned by our speaker about taxation is the fact that there should be, as much as possible, a simplified form of taxation. And he's correct. But unfortunately, the more they talk about it, the more our legislature, for instance, would make some enactments to make it more simple, the more it becomes complex. Did you notice that? Unlike before, when we were doing a lot of good return on our income taxation, now we have the train. And I have found it so difficult that I could no longer file my own income tax. And I asked a certified public accountant to do it for me. And that is how taxation is made more simple. I would like also to say that I find this subject matter really that important and timely indeed. And if we are experiencing what we are having now, it is because I think of taxation more than anything else. I think our greatest problem today is inflation, and if despite all the denials, I think it's because of the train. that, can be considered as one of the main factors why we're having it. And I hope I won't lose my job as a consultant of the central bank because of it. Taxation, along with police power and eminent domain, is just going to the basics. It's an inherent attribute of a sovereign state. Constitutional provisions are meant not to grant sovereign powers, essential and already conferred upon the very existence of the state, but to define and delimit their parameters and proper exercise. I think this is what you tried to convey in the 1987 Constitution, the two guys who were responsible for it and who are strongly against any amendment of the current Constitution. Because according to the chief and according to Adolf, the provisions have not all yet been implemented. Is that correct? Are you sure they are not? I think I quite agree. But now, great advances in science and technology, globalization and societal transformation, trade imbalances and economic protectionism, as well as other major and structural changes in various other areas, continue to evolve. Correspondingly, the dynamism of government, dictated not only by its expanding aims but likewise driven by necessity, added new dimensions to the concept of taxation. It is now a little bit different, as you know. No longer, for instance, does one seriously contest the use of taxation in order to achieve what traditionally police power measures could cover, such as now being really seriously and increasingly addressed, social justice and the equitable distribution of wealth, economic progress and the protection of industries, enhancement of public welfare, and similar objectives. The Supreme Court in Sison versus Ancheta, mentioned by our speaker, said that it is manifest that the field of state activity has assumed a much wider scope. It reiterated that the areas that used to be left to private enterprise and initiative, in which the government was called upon to enter optionally and only because it was better equipped than the private sector to administer for the public welfare, continue to lose their well-defined boundaries and to be absorbed within the activities that the government must undertake in its sovereign capacity if it is to meet the increasing social challenges of the times. The power to tax is the strongest of all the powers of government. It is, of course, to be admitted that for all its plenitude, the power to tax is not unconfined. There are restrictions, as you know. These tax power restrictions may be grouped into the inherent limitations or those that are embedded in the power itself, and the constitutional limitations or those that the fundamental law of the land itself has opted to provide. As you know, if the Constitution puts up some provisions, they are meant to, insofar as the three inherent powers are concerned, to define or to limit those powers, because they are otherwise almost without any borders at all. But they are subject to some exception. The notable ones I would like to mention to you today is that taxation is really territorial in nature. Taxation may be exercised only within the territorial jurisdiction of the taxing authority. Within the territorial jurisdiction, this taxing authority may determine the place of taxation. So they can determine the factors under which taxation may be levied or imposed by the taxing authority. But to give an idea on how this works, for poll taxes, isa lang ang poll taxes natin, di ba? Yung dating, the one that we had before, the so-called community tax. The allowable tax situs is the residence of the taxpayer. For instance, it would be violative of the rule on territoriality for the Philippines to impose a poll tax on a Filipino who is not a resident of the Philippines. Bawal yun. So, tatlong klaseng taxes lang yan. You have the poll tax. The second is the property tax. The property tax situs can only be where the property is located or situated. Thus, the real property tax under the real property tax code cannot under the real property tax provision of the local government code cannot be imposed on real property located abroad, although owned by Filipino citizens. So if you happen to have some real property, a residential place outside the country, that cannot be subject to a property tax by the Philippine government. And the last tax, and this is the one which can be really that broad, is the excise tax. This is where they can hit everybody. For excise taxes, the tax situs can be the place where the privilege is exercised. The second rule, where the taxpayer is a national of. So that if you are a citizen, maski saan nang galing yung income tax mo, income mo, that can be subjected to tax, unfortunately. And normally that would not be subject to a treaty provision because you are a national of the Philippines if you are it's a Philippine tax that you're talking about. Then the taxing authority is really given a wide latitude in the case of excise taxes. Unless otherwise stated, the tax situs is deemed to be the place where the privilege is exercised in the case of excise taxes. Otherwise stated, the tax situs is under any one of the three categories. One would be, biro mo ito magagamit nila, the nationality of the taxpayer, the residence of the taxpayer. So if you are a resident of the Philippines, they can tax your income wherever it is from, whether it is derived here or from abroad. And the place of the exercise of the privilege. And these all three are actually now being used by the Philippine government, and in fact by almost every government. The second main one that maybe we should be aware of as a limitation is the fact that taxation is subject to international comity. The Philippine Constitution has expressly accepted the generally accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land. Pag sinabi mong as part of the law of the land, parang it's really a domestic law. And you are really talking, hindi na ba lahat ng anything international is part of the law of the Philippines? You're only talking of two, really. One would be the customary international law, like the diplomatic immunity, things like this. No? Well, what about the one of extradition? That's not customary, and therefore it's not part. The second one, para maging part dito sa law natin, would be those by treaty or conventions. And this is where the extradition would come in. Then it can be enforced in the Philippines. But if we do not have a treaty with a country, extradition will not work with that country. So, sana maliwanag na yun. I'm going to skip a few things because I'm now, ano na lang ako, 5 minutes na lang. The provision, ito, I think we should know this. No? The provisions of the Constitution on taxation directly affect the state's power to tax. In other words, all provisions of the Constitution can affect taxation, either directly or indirectly. So, mas mataas yung Constitution kesa sa power of taxation. Would then the due process clause be superior to the power to tax? The answer is what? Yes. Lahat ng provision ng Constitution would be superior to that of taxation. But in the case of police power at saka eminent domain, mas mataas yung what? Mas mataas yung police power kesa yung sa mga provisions indirectly affecting police power or eminent domain, which means that in order that police power and eminent domain can be limited by the Constitution, they must have been intended really for what? For as limitations for police power and eminent domain. Pagdating sa taxation, any provision would subordinate the power to tax. And that is why when one says strongest of all the three inherent powers of sovereignty is taxation, they do not refer to the real power to tax, but they refer to the breadth and scope, yung what it can cover. Talagang to that extent, the broadest one, the most the taxation, the one that can cover almost everything under the sun is taxation. But as far as the strength of that exercise is concerned, it is the weakest of the three inherent powers. Okay, very clear. There are, as our lecturer said, meron pa akong 3 minutes. As our lecturer said, there are some aspects of taxation. These aspects of taxation include levy, at saka yung assessment collection, at saka remedies. Yun ang aspects of taxation. This is where the state can come in and then be able to achieve yung whatever policies they might have using taxation in their economic programs. Dito ginagamit yung taxation. It is in the aspects of taxation that they are able to do this. And so I need not repeat those aspects which were already mentioned so extensively by our dear friend. But finally, I would like to mention this kasi I have not done this yet before, so this is the first time I'm going to say this. It's about the economy. I hope you're interested. The danger of protectionism that wreaked havoc the world in the Great Depression during the 20s and early 30s in this century just passed, and the financial crisis that visited not too long ago the world, actually, once again loom in the horizon, though now in its mild equivalent, but mild ngayon, but we can never tell. Mild equivalent of trade imbalances, economic nationalism, deglobalization, financial mercantilism, or their equivalents. Still, we must add to this complexities, the other realities of information and technological nuances, international politics, and other influences that likewise come to bear. Adolf, I was really affected by that thing about climate change and things like that. It's really horrible. And it's one of the 5 major things that we must watch and which might affect the world. Not really of future, no? Of tomorrow. It's coming very closely, very near. Very nakakatakot. It's one of the 5 items that we must be worried about. How should the country now respond to the critical milieu? Considerably, the judiciary does not formulate and dictate state policies, but the changing environment, evolution if you will, is moving in too fast. Actual controversies can arise even before policy makers are able to have these matters in their agenda. The result might then leave the courts the initial task of taking up and passing upon kindred and untried solutions to problems, while these are still being aptly addressed by the appropriate agency. They cannot act as fast as we do. The matter is not totally new to the courts. Since about 3 decades ago, there has been an increasing perception of judicial activism, a term that is used to describe the interference by the courts in political and economic issues. Given the current global economic volatility, it should be understandable to again witness some renewed interest, if not vigorous, discordant notes in this emerging concern. I think it is, and we must be ready for it. In critical times, courts cease to be simple entities for resolving litigations. They too become, by sheer reality and force of necessity, the bridges to let things through. In this arena, the Constitution, old, current, new, or forthcoming, whatever. The law is not to be viewed with rigidity, but with some flexibility to be ably responsive. Thank you very much, my friends.
Thank you very much, sir. We shall now hear the reaction of our second reactor, Atty. Abelardo T. Dumondon. Atty. Abelardo T. Dumondon is a multiple academic degree holder, ABN Economics, BSc Accountancy, LLB, LLM, and Masters in Economics. He topped the 1964 Broker's Licensure Examination. He is also a certified public accountant, and in 1985, he placed fourth in the bar examinations. He is presently a member of the Legal Education Board and a bar reviewer in taxation at the UP Law Center. In 2011, he was a bar examiner and a Hall of Famer given by PICPA. He became a managing partner of the Valdez Dumondon law firm, and he held various positions in private corporations, and to name some, Ford Philippines, Motorola Philippines, Unioil, Honeron Philippines, Esso Standard Fertilizer, among others. And he is also an author of various law books in taxation, legal ethics, remedial law, and commercial law. Ladies and gentlemen, Attorney Abelardo T. Dumondon.
Salamat po. Following the statement of Justice Adolf, I'll just say, ladies and gentlemen, because I might forget to name some parties. Okay. All right. So the lecture of Justice Jap, again, was made in a very simple manner that helped us went our way to the complicated aspect of taxation. He led our hand and led us through without falling into the trap of the complexities of taxation. So I think we have to thank him for that. The reaction also of Justice Bito was very interesting, adding, of course, to the other items that Justice Jap would like to say, but for lack of material time, didn't say it anymore. Now, The lecture again provided a good understanding of the concept and underpinnings of the difficult and complicated subject of taxation in the simplest possible manner. The simple approach, though, did not detract from the witty discussion of technical aspects of the subject, through which the lecturer has successfully navigated. The reaction centers on 2 points. Number one, tax policy and tax education. The lecture title points the direction to be taken by the reaction paper. The lecturer identified specific tax principles which could optimize the conflicting demands for the generation of tax revenues and their judicious utilization to meet the objectives of inclusive economic growth, development, prosperity, and stability. Thus, the lecturer went to great length in describing the result of mistakes in tax policy that led to the downfall of states and kingdoms. This reaction is premised upon the adage that those who do not learn from the lessons of history are bound to repeat them. The Philippine government must be aware of this adage, else it would suffer the same fate described by the lecturer as having been undergone the great Roman Empire that suffered by English King John and the English Parliament, whose imposition of tax on tea hastened the American Revolution, which resulted in the separation of the colonies from the English regime. Present-day media, but formerly informal, bombards the public daily with description of Train 1 as a train to perdition. This arose, again, from the tax policy that reduced individual income taxes, with increased indirect tax burdens in order to offset the loss of tax revenues resulting from reduction of income taxes. Likewise, you might have noticed that there is a bias towards the rich. Why bias towards the rich? When you look at the estate taxes, for example, the dollars taxes, the deductions have been increased. The tax rate was also decreased. The poor does not have anything to give to their children. That's why I say this particular Train 1 affects the poor more than the rich. The reduced income tax resulted to increase money in circulation. So when you reduce the income tax, what happens is that you are releasing money for personal disposable income. But on the other hand, what happened was that there was now a spiraling of prices because of the increased money circulation. The result is inflation, which the money street now attributes to the effects of Train 1. To be fair, the government parading statistics disputes the view that Train 1 is the main generator of inflation. There are other factors like volatile oil prices, the stronger dollar, and the various natural calamities such as Ompong. Of course, the government is partially correct. But how could it argue with the man on the street who looks at the prices of rice, looks at the prices of fish, looks at the prices of vegetables, look at other prices? This is a dangerous condition which the stabilizers could take advantage of to topple the government. The government should therefore act with dispatch in moving towards tax policies that would address inflation. Some suggest an immediate suspension of the excise tax on petroleum. This might be a good strategy because of the multiplier effect that oil products have on the price of day-to-day goods. But this should not be the only move that should be undertaken by the government. As seen from another point of view, the Supreme Court in the case of Soriano versus Secretary of Finance decided January 24, 2017, talk about the concept of blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg, this is a technical term actually. But what is meant by blitzkrieg? It is the process, according to the Supreme Court, citing of course American authorities, it is the process by which inflation pushes individuals into higher tax brackets, occurs, and its deleterious results may be explained as follows. Quote, an individual whose dollar income increases from 1 year to the next might be obliged to pay a tax at a higher marginal rate, say 25% instead of 20% on the increase. This being a natural consequence of rate progression. If, however, due to inflation, the benefit of the increase is wiped out by corresponding increase in the cost of living, the effect would be heavier tax burden with no real improvement in the taxpayer's economic position. Wage and salary earners are especially vulnerable. Even if a worker gets a raise in wages this year, the raise would be illusory if the price of consumer goods rise in the same proportion. If the marginal rate tax is also increased, the result would actually be a decrease in the taxpayer's real disposable income. The Supreme Court went on further to say, and we quote again, the phenomenon of blitzkrieg could be prevented through the inclusion of an indexation provision in which the graduated tax rates are adjusted periodically without need of amending the tax law. The 1997 tax code Remember, the Supreme Court then was interpreting the 1907 tax code, however, has no such indexation provision. It should be emphasized that indexation to inflation is now a standard feature of a modern tax code. End of quote. It is interesting to note that Train 1 also has no indexation provisions for income taxation, although it retained the indexation provision for those that may be subjected to VAT, the 3 million benchmark. So also, the Customs Modernization Tariff Act contains indexation provisions. So therefore, indexation provisions are not new. In order to offset the ill effects of inflation, the government might consider indexation provision for income taxation, but not for indirect taxes. On the other hand, let's look at tax education. Finally, it is the reactor's belief that the grumblings about the supposed evils of Train 1 and taxation, in general, results from a lack of understanding of the principles of taxation as tools for inclusive economic growth, development, prosperity, and stability. The lack of understanding is exacerbated by the dual system. It is the reactor's observation that the current curricular objectives of teaching taxation is to encourage compliance and not really an understanding of the whole taxation scheme is, its purposes, and its advantages and disadvantages. It is just said that there will be some discussion on tax policy to enable the public at large to intelligently participate in the discourse on public tax policy. Most discussion on tax policy is based on emotion, often encouraged by charlatans in the media who pretend to be tax experts, or tax experts whose hidden agenda should already be apparent to the public by now. In summary, the government should be able to immediately act once it is discerned that the results of implementation of tax policy negatively affects the public in general, and that the approach towards tax education should be accorded a second look in order to provide the public with an understanding and that taxes are truly the lifeblood without which the citizen government is imperiled. All right, thank you and good day.
Thank you very much, Attorney Dumondon. May I invite our esteemed lecturer, Justice Jobs, our two reactors, Justice Vitug and Attorney Dumondon, to occupy the table in front. We shall now open the floor for some questions from our audience. You may use the microphone at the aisle. Please state your name and the office before you ask any question. Any question? Magtanong. From our lawyers.
Good morning, Your Honors. I am Romel Oquendo of Metrobank Card Corporation, and I'm really delighted to be here. Your Honors, my question is about filing of protest after receiving the final assessment notice. I've been with the institution for 8 years, and we encountered a few instances where I suggested to file a protest of the final assessment notice of the Honorable BIR. However, there is an apprehension that while the protest is ongoing, the computation of the penalties will not be stalled, and there goes the business decision not to protest. Being the legal officer of that institution, Your Honors, I am constrained not to pursue with my protest. May I know, Your Honors, what would be the best remedy, especially right now that there's a change under the train law? That will be all, Your Honor.
I made mention about the new revenue regulations 7-2018, which restored the notice of informal conference. My humble view is that that will further delay, because if you read the decision of the Supreme Court in the case of Commissioner versus Metro Stark Superama, it only pointed out the importance of that preliminary assessment notice. It must be made in accordance with the procedural due process. I understand your predicament. If you don't intend to protest as an assessment, why don't you look at 204 and find out if it can be the subject of compromise? It's either doubtful validity or financial incapacity. And as regards doubtful validity under revenue regulations 7-2001 as amended by revenue regulations 13-2002, there are 9 doubtful validity cases. One of them is the Japar B assessment. You can ask for compromise on that ground. Another is if you believe that the basis of such an assessment is doubtful, as it may be made based on evidence obtainable. Take note that, as explained by the Supreme Court in case of Commissioner versus Antiques Trading, the ordinary rules of procedure may be relaxed. So here's the evidence is admissible there. That's why on the basis of that, that makes it doubtful, and you can take advantage of that as for compromise on that ground. Thank you so much.
Any other question? So everything is clear? May we now thank our esteemed lecturer and our two reactors. How about a big hand for them? Thank you very much. Once again, may I call the world-class Supreme Court Choir for an intermission number.
Nagniningning sa buong alinlangan, hangat ko'y tagumpay natin. Buhay may isang munting pangarap sa ating dakilang lupain, at sa sama-sama nating pagsisikap, sama-sama rin mararating ang iba't ibang lalaw, isang patutunguhan, dito isang araw, isang kapuluhan, sama-sama nating abutin, pinakamatayon na bituin. At ang ating tagumpay, tagumpay ng ating lahi, tagumpay ng ating lipi, ang tanging ibig at inaawa. Hangat ko'y tagumpay natin lahat. Hangat ko'y tagumpay natin lahat.
We now proceed to the presentation of the paper to the Metrobank Foundation Incorporated and the Supreme Court of the Philippines. May- We shall now take advantage of the presence of the President of Metrobank Foundation Incorporated, who will give us an inspiring message, complete with ABP. He is a man of vision. He will also talk about the ideals, aspirations, and accomplishments of the Metrobank Foundation Incorporated. A man of vision, a paragon of philanthropy, altruism, and genuine concern for the community. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Aniceto M. Sobrepeña.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, honorable justices, law practitioners, students, good afternoon po. Good morning. Taxes are what we pay for civilized society. This is a quote from former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. So relevant that this was the phrase that was inscribed above the entrance of the U.S. Internal Revenue Service. Admittedly, the mere mention of taxes will make most people cringe with thoughts of long queues and foregone income. As is the intention of the Metrobank Foundation Professorial Chair Lectures in Law, which is to illuminate on areas that are of national importance and interest, this morning we are certain that our lecturer had shed light on this sensitive topic. The partnership with the Philippine Judicial Academy was established as a means of capacity building and promoting excellence in legal education, not just for legal practitioners, but for the general public as well. We are very pleased that the torch has now been passed on to Associate Justice Japar Dimaampao, sir. We also thank likewise Justice Jose Bitug, a previous Metrobank Foundation Professorial Chairholder himself, and to a new friend, Attorney Abelardo Dumondon, for their studied reaction papers. We continue to thank the Philippine Judicial Academy, led by Chancellor Adolf Ascuna, also a chairholder of this Metrobank Foundation chair, for being one of our longest and most dependable social development partners. As can be seen in the tarpaulin, this is the 15th lecture which we do annually. Through the Academy, Metrobank Foundation is able to contribute to the continuing improvement of the judicial education. Taxes need not have such a bleak role in our lives, as our speakers have discussed. In Attorney Alex Lacson's bestseller book, 12 Little Things Every Filipino Can Do to Help Our Country, unquote, number 10 is to pay your taxes. Paying taxes dutifully is one of the simplest but yet most effective forms of nation building. As I close, I would like you to watch our audiovisual presentation to further explain Metrobank Foundation's contribution to nation building, aside from our group paying dutifully our taxes. Thank you very much.
A generous heart is a great equalizer. When a heart cares, serves, and transforms, it can help improve people's lives and grow communities. Generosity is at the heart of what we do at Metrobank Foundation. Our founder himself is a generous man. He had said, "I make money, so I give money back." Since day one, Dr. George SKT has been guided by the belief that wealth, once made, is meant to be shared. He saw many opportunities to make things better for the Filipinos. All it would take, he said, is heart. Thus, Metrobank Foundation has been envisioned to be the country's premier corporate philanthropic organization that contributes a significant impact on social development. To do our work well, we rely on our roadmap: excel, engage, empower. We aim to uplift individuals and link up with like-minded institutions for a shared purpose. We also aspire to propagate a culture of excellence and provide solutions to the needs of our stakeholders. Through the Metrobank Foundation Outstanding Filipinos, exemplary teachers, soldiers, and police officers are recognized for rendering service above and beyond their call of duty.
We could not discount the importance of heart in public service. Being a soldier, your capital is your life. You should not hesitate. You should not have a second thought in the performance of your duty, because soldiery is more than a profession. You are laying down your life.
The heart is actually the core of our public service. The heart teaches us to unselfishly give service to the people who we are committed to protect and to serve. It is a sense of satisfaction when you are able to use your heart and see people smile and having fun because of what you do.
Here in the Philippines, there are a lot of people who are marginalized and underserved. We have a lot of opportunities to work for them. So I think when you say heart in public service, it's really knowing who you work for, and at the end of the day, you know you serve these people.
The annual Metrobank Art and Design Excellence hails the creativity of the Filipino through the annual competitions in painting and sculpture.
Yeah, heart is actually passion, more on passion of doing the artwork, by passion of creating works that will touch the society, heal the society. That for me is having a heart.
Having heart in whatever it is you're doing will fuel that creativity. I'm fortunate enough to work with students and teachers who are already creative in their own right. The output is a manifestation of the creativity, wherein if they put a little bit of time and effort to that, plus that heart, will make an outstanding art piece.
The Metrobank MTAP DepEd Math Challenge is our way of helping students become competitive in mathematics.
As a student and a mathlete, it is perseverance and passion that make me excel. Perseverance is actually hard work and discipline. On the other hand, passion is the drive to pursue something in spite of difficulties and failures, and the will to stick to it in the long term.
We provide financial assistance to underprivileged but academically deserving students.
Holding on to principles of honor and excellence, because excellence is nothing without honor, and honor is important because not only are we scholars of the university, but we are scholars of the entire country. Therefore, it is our responsibility that we have to not only be a part of, but to contribute to the community that we are in.
We encourage different sectors of society to pay tribute to the teaching profession through the National Teachers Month. We work with like-minded organizations whose programs are aligned with our health, education, arts, and livelihood thrusts towards the attainment of sustainable development goals.
I think heart is the beginning of any creative endeavor. It allows you to be empathetic, sympathetic. It allows you to be compassionate. It's the current that actually helps you translate something intangible into something tangible, which is an artwork.
Heart, really, when we are dealing with people, we have to deal with empathy. It's not enough that if we wanted social upliftment, it's not enough that we give money or material things. They have to feel that they are part of this.
It is essentially what separates social work, social development work, from the regular development work. You deal with people, you deal with their hopes, their dreams, and you try to find out their strength and build on that so that eventually they could be self-reliant, and that's very important in sustainability.
Calzada Coffee champions Philippine specialty coffee. We wanted to be the calzada, or the road from farm to cup, and bridge the coffee farmers to the market. We basically wanted to put Philippine coffee back into the international market, not just in terms of volume, but also in terms of quality. It's very important to be able to understand the needs of the people we support. And we can only hear them if we use the heart. It's not only listening through the ears, but more importantly, through the heart.
Through our grants program, we help raise the quality of life of the poorest, most vulnerable, and underserved sectors of society. We aid survivors of natural calamities in the Philippines and Asia through relief and rehabilitation efforts. Serving as our healthcare arm is the Manila Doctors Hospital, offering social services to indigents and health interventions in adopted communities.
The work that we do has limitations in itself, but when we harness and maximize generosity, it can play a huge role in meeting the needs of society. By generosity, we don't mean only monetarily, but also the heart to share time, talent, and skill. Only then can we equal the kind of heart that contributes to the greatness of our country.
To be a leader in philanthropy may come naturally to Metrobank Foundation, but the bigger vision is to be the soul of philanthropy in the country. That is where our heart truly lies.
Thank you very much, Metrobank Foundation Incorporated, for your big heart and helping hands. We shall now proceed to the presentation of the paper to Metrobank Foundation Incorporated and the Supreme Court of the Philippines. May I invite Justice Dimaampao, Mr. Sobre Peña, and Justice Ascuna. And representing the Supreme Court is our Cardinal, Justice Joey Reyes. Justice Dimaampao will now present the paper to Mr. Sobre Peña. And now the paper will be presented by Metrobank Foundation to the Supreme Court of the Philippines, represented by Justice Joey Reyes. We shall now have the presentation of the endowment to the Chairholder, Justice Japar Dimaampao, by Metrobank Foundation Incorporated. Subject to tax. Okay. And finally, we shall have the presentation of plaques of appreciation to the Metrobank Foundation Incorporated, to the Chairholder, and to our reactors. We shall present the plaque of appreciation to the Metrobank Foundation Incorporated. It reads, the Supreme Court, the Philippine Judicial Academy, present this testament of gratitude to Metrobank Foundation Incorporated for having contributed significantly to the enhancement of judicial education. The Metrobank Foundation's endowment has allowed members of the Philippine judiciary to benefit from the scholar research and presentation of the holder of the 2018 Metrobank Foundation Professorial Chair in Taxation Law, Honorable Japar B. Dimaampao, who presented a paper entitled Tax Principles and Remedies, Tools for Inclusive Economic Growth, Development, Prosperity, and Stability at the 15th Metrobank Foundation Professorial Chair Lecture. By this presents, we express our gratitude and acknowledge the contribution of the Metrobank Foundation Incorporated to the success of this program. Given this 17th day of October 2018 at the Supreme Court and Banc Session Hall, Manila. Signed by the Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio T. Carpio and Field Chancellor Adolfo S. Ascuna. Now we present the plaque of appreciation to the Chairholder. The citation reads, this academic recognition is given to Honorable Japar B. Dimaampao in fitting recognition of his excellent presentation and delivery of his scholarly paper entitled Tax Principles and Remedies, Tools for Inclusive Economic Growth, Development, Prosperity, and Stability, given at the 15th Metrobank Foundation Professorial Chair Lecture this 17th day of October 2018 at the Supreme Court and Banc Session Hall, Manila, signed by Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio T. Carpio and Field Chancellor Adolfo S. Ascuna. We shall now present the plaques of appreciation to our reactors, Justice Vitug and Attorney Dumondon. The plaques are similarly worded and the plaques read, this academic recognition is presented to Honorable Jose C. Vitug, Attorney Abelardo T. Dumondon for being a reactor to the paper entitled Tax Principles and Remedies, Tools for Inclusive Economic Growth, Development, Prosperity, and Stability, delivered by Justice Japar B. Dimaampao at the 15th Metrobank Foundation Professorial Chair Lecture, given this 17th day of October 2018 at the Supreme Court and Banc Session Hall, Manila. Signed by Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio T. Carpio and PhilJet Chancellor Adolfo S. Ascuna. Your Honors, ladies and gentlemen, this ends the program for today. Thank you for joining us this morning. After the audio-visual presentation of the Philippine Judiciary hymn, everyone is invited for lunch outside the session hall. Our esteemed guests and the guests of Justice Japar Dimaampao will be served at the dignitaries' lounge. Also, don't forget to fill up the evaluation forms given to you this morning and submit them at the Secretariat's table. Likewise, to the lawyers, please submit your duly filled MCLE form also at the Secretary's table. Thank you. Once again, have a nice afternoon.